This is the fifth episode in our latest season covering unsolved homicides across the United States, and the first in a two-part series. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are solely the interviewee's own. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This series discusses crime scenes, violence, and homicide. Listener discretion is advised. This is The Fall Line. It was around 10 p.m. on September 7th, 2023, when emergency services arrived at a home on Broomall Street in southwest Philadelphia. According to Fox 29, they'd come in response to a wellness check call. The family of 80-year-old Rose Goodman hadn't been able to reach her that day. Her 3 adult children had worried about their mother since their father, Donald Butch Goodman, passed away in 2021. But they knew how strong their family's ties were to the community. Their parents had lived on the same block for 50 years and had served through the church, the schools, and local and national organizations for decades. There was a network of people ready to help Rose Goodman right along with her adult children Devin, Alan, and Donna. And though they didn't want her living alone and were working with their mother to transition things so that she would eventually move in with one of them, they knew that she felt at home in the place where she'd been so happy with their father. But they were worried. They flew or drove to their old home often, bringing Rose's 7 grandchildren to visit and to tend to household maintenance and deal with all the paperwork that life brings. Alan, her middle son, told us that they tried to transition their mother to as many electronic conveniences as possible, like e-billing and banking, so that she wouldn't have to make as many trips around town. But she'd never really taken to it. His father had been the tech-savvy one in their marriage. When gun violence increased in Philly, they'd considered a camera system for Rose's home, but their mother felt overwhelmed by the complications. And their childhood home was sturdily built and the door reinforced with a number of locks. Their block had not seen much crime either, and that's why the 3 siblings preferred their mother stay home and in contact. She felt safest there with her regular visitors and her familiar surroundings. If she needed anything, she just had to place a call to any number of neighbors, relatives, or friends. When her youngest child, Donna, phoned Rose on September 7th and couldn't reach her, she began to worry. They spoke very often, and it wasn't like her mother to miss a call. When Donna checked in with Devin and Alan, she discovered Devin had spoken with Rose most recently, and all had been well. But now, no one could get in contact. Their immediate concern was that Rose could have fallen, or had a medical emergency, or fainted due to the heat. Her air conditioner had been having issues, and it was taking some time to have repairs completed. So they called their cousin, a registered nurse, and they asked her to stop by. An across-the-street neighbor they'd grown up with joined her at Rose's home. He often helped Rose with physical tasks like taking out the trash or lawn care, and wanted to be on hand just in case. When the 2 entered the house, they didn't notice anything amiss. Not at first. They were too intent on locating Rose. Normally, she would have been watching TV, her favorite pastime. Instead, they found Rose collapsed in an upstairs room of the home. They alerted emergency services, and her cousin began CPR. The pair assumed that there'd been an accident, or she'd suddenly fallen ill. Her husband Butch had a stroke while driving years before, and the family knew how suddenly things could change. It wouldn't be until later that the true story emerged. Someone had broken in through the secured basement window of the Goodmans' home and confronted Rose on the 2nd floor. According to ABC6, quote, Goodman was shot 1 time in the chest and later died. As far as the family's aware, nothing was taken from the residence, and Rose's murderer has not yet been apprehended. That is not due to a lack of effort on the part of Philadelphia's police department. Though the detective in charge of this case could not comment on record for these episodes, the investigation has stayed active over the past 2 years, and Rose Goodman's family has remained in consistent contact with various members of PPD. At a press conference in September of 2023, Philadelphia Police Lieutenant Hamilton Marshman said, quote, when an 80-year-old woman who did nothing but love her family, friends, and the community her entire life is brutally murdered in her home, we as a society cannot and should not accept this. I want the coward who took Miss Rose Goodman away from her family and friends to know your life will never be the same. You will never have a good night's sleep. You will look over your shoulder constantly because you will not know when the day will come when we will be outside your home. That's a sentiment shared by many in Southwest Philadelphia and across the city. The Goodmans made a positive impact on the lives of hundreds of people, more than their children ever even knew until their parents' deaths. And the community wants to see Rose get justice. PPD is taking that seriously. But they, and most especially the Goodman family, need help in gathering more information from the public and spreading more awareness of Rose's case. It's believed that Rose was shot in the early morning hours of September 7th, 2023, at her home on the 5700 block of Broomall. But whoever broke into her home would have been at work at that basement window for some time, and it's likely that they came to the house with a plan to commit the crime, and with the necessary tools to do so. Rose's story has stayed in the Philadelphia news intermittently, thanks to local media's coverage of anniversary events and the efforts of her children. But reports failed to reach national outlets, so we had not heard what happened, not until her middle son, Alan, got in contact. He and Donna, his youngest sister, agreed to speak with us about their mother, about both their parents, and what made their lives in Philadelphia so special. It's more than that, though. They told us about the big and small ways that Butch and Rose made an impact on Southwest Philadelphia, and how deeply their losses felt. Because their family was and is so close, they were able to tell us a lot, and we want to share those stories with you. Rose's life was about a lot more than what happened to her that September, and that's one of the many reasons that so many people were affected by her loss.
So my mom grew up in North Philadelphia. And so you have North Philadelphia, you have South Philadelphia, Southwest Philadelphia, you have Northeast Philadelphia. They all have different kind of cultures within those neighborhoods. And so my mother grew up there and she was living with her mother, Louise White.
She grew up in a holiness church, which is pretty strict, like a strict Christian upbringing, because her grandfather was a holiness minister. So she wasn't allowed to do a lot of different things, which probably makes sense when we think about our upbringing. It was a pretty strict, I would say, Christian home or upbringing. She always said that her grandmother would bake rolls and bread for the family. Like everybody would go off to work and school, and then they would stop off by grandmother's house on the way home. My mom grew up in North Philadelphia, and her mother moved her to West Philadelphia because it was a better environment. North Philly was really, really rough way back when, and it's still probably a little rough to this day. So to get her out of harm's way, her mom moved her to West Philadelphia, to Locust Street.
They ended up moving to Southwest Philadelphia, actually in a house that's probably about 10 minutes from our family home. Coincidentally, when she moved to Southwest Philadelphia, she lived across the street from the man who would be her future husband, my dad. He lived directly across the street. She would see him because he had three brothers, and his mom was a single mom as well. And she would see them going to church because the church that they went to and that my mom ended up going to was a couple blocks up from their house.
I remember my mother's mother saying what she really, really loved about my dad and his family was that no matter how late they were out on Saturday nights, Sunday morning, you would see the four boys running down the street, putting their ties on, putting their suit jackets on, and running to church.
Alan and Donna told us that Rose and Butch began dating as young adults. But just as it did for so many couples in the 1960s, the Vietnam War and the draft changed the course of their lives.
I think he was drafted in 1963 because the way the story goes is that my dad came to my mom and said, "Hey, I have some news." And he kind of had two things. He had his hands behind his back and he said, "Pick one." And so she picked one and it was an engagement ring. And then he pulled the other one out. It was a draft notice.
He wasn't really who was supposed to marry. My mother, the person she was dating had already been, I think, drafted. And my dad was the person really that my grandmother selected. She just really loved him and wanted my mom to marry my dad. So when this other guy came back, it was like a shock. So that's a story that's, interesting in itself. My grandmother hid the letters that the original guy was sending because she wanted my mom to marry my dad. So all was forgiven, later down the line. I just know that they really loved each other. She was engaged at, I think it was maybe 19. And I know he flew home from Germany to marry her in the dining room of the Locust Street house.
My mom was working at a company called Smith Klein, which I think they still exist now. But my dad calls and says, "Hey, I want to take you on a honeymoon." My mom was, I think, the only Black woman in her office. She was one of the secretaries. And she wanted to go to, I think, Atlantic City for a honeymoon. And the women in the office were like, no, 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 no. He said pick anywhere. So they flipped the globe and they picked Paris. And so my dad flew her out to Paris and they had a 3-week honeymoon in Paris. She stopped working at the office she was working at when she became pregnant with me, I think. And so she focused on raising us. But what she did do is, as we got old enough to go to elementary school, she ended up volunteering at that school, which was Albert M. Greenfield School, which is downtown in Philadelphia, which took some effort getting us into because it was outside of our zip code. And so, it was a really good school, probably one of the best elementary schools in this state. My mom and dad were big believers in education, and so they somehow got us in there. And so she ended up volunteering there. And then eventually they hired her as a teacher's aide.
One thing that she told me that always stuck with me was how she would sacrifice. So she doesn't have a lot of money because she's not really working and, she's really relying on my dad's income. So she would make herself like a little snack, like peanut butter and jelly crackers or something like that. And then she would take my brothers to the mall or out to a restaurant because she wanted them to have a fine dining experience. So she wouldn't order anything. She ate at home, but she would give them the menus and let them order and have a fancy lunch. And I thought, wow, now that I'm a parent, what a sacrifice, that you would eat before taking your children out to a restaurant so that they could have this fine dining experience. When I came along, my mom was home with me, and I remember her teaching me phonics. She had a little blue book with a teddy bear on the front, and she just taught me how to read between that book and little letters on the refrigerator. I ended up majoring in management with an emphasis in finance at Hampton University. But my mom would say, when you have a family of your own, you may want to go into education because it's going to allow you to get on the same schedule as your children. So I went all around the mulberry bush until maybe a week before my mom passed and ended up entering into education, which made her, she was thrilled. And the last conversation she had with a friend was about how happy she was that I had finally found, a job that I loved.
Rose eventually began working at a dentist office, which eventually inspired her oldest son, Devin, to pursue dentistry as a career. Alan and Donna both became educators, a professor and a teacher. Whether she was working or at home with the kids, Rose was focused on where they were and what they were doing. And, Alan told us, she was not afraid to step in and say something when people were mistreating them or anyone else. Rose had a strong sense of justice that shaped how her children viewed the world, too.
So my mom, she was a fighter. She believed in getting the best for us and really standing up for any injustice against not only just us, but other people too. I remember a story when I was probably maybe 5 or 6, maybe. My brother was 8, I think. We went to this YMCA which was in like a suburb of Philadelphia. We had a membership there. My parents wanted us to learn how to swim because, as you may know, the percentage of Black people who know how to swim is lower, and there's a whole history of racism around that. And they were always forward thinking as far as that's concerned, like, hey, we're going to make sure you guys know how to swim. And so, you had a little plastic membership card. We showed our cards to the woman at the desk. She said, look, you guys don't come in here causing trouble again. So we kind of looked at each other. We were like, what do you mean? Like, we were confused. She's like, hey, your friends were in here yesterday. And so she let us through. And so, we told our mom, and my mom's face changed. And she went back to the front desk. She told us to wait. She went back to the front desk, and she just gave it to that lady. It was like, how dare you try to just because my kids are Black, and I guess these kids that came in yesterday that you said were causing trouble were Black. How dare you just lump them in with them? And so she let her have it, and that didn't happen again. And that's kind of the person my mom was, where she was very classy, but if you put her in a position where she has to kind of get you together, as we used to say, like, she'll do that. The other thing is that, which I understand as a parent now, my mom was very big on, if we were going outside, she wanted to know where we were going. We had to be in by the time the street lights went out. I'm sure that sounds familiar. And, she's really looked at who we were hanging around. Our family home became the home where all the kids in the neighborhood felt comfortable hanging out. Our friends would come over, hang out. My mom made this homemade iced tea. They would love it. They would have that and sandwich cookies, whatever snacks we had, and they would just hang out at our house. My mom really loved to cook. So basically how I learned to cook is that the kids in our neighborhood, we would go around, we'd play basketball like around the city, and we'd had our team. There's a young lady who grew up across the street from me. We were born on the same day. And so she was our point guard. And so we would go and we'd go play in different areas and that sort of thing. And so one day I told my parents I was going to the library after school, and that's why I was coming home late. And so they probably didn't believe it, but they wanted to see how long I would keep the lie going. I was really just going to play basketball. And so I got busted, and my mom, was pretty upset. And so she grounded me, but what she said was that I'm going to make you help me in the kitchen, right? She would have all of us, my brother and I both like snapping, green beans or whatever we were doing. But I kind of got the intense lessons because that was part of my punishment. And the way our house is that there's an alley right by our house that gets to our backyard. And kids were playing outside because the windows would be up and the screens are in. I could hear them playing. And so part of the punishment is that I could hear them playing outside, but I'm inside helping my mom cook. And so they would come down the alley and stand by the kitchen window and say, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm snapping peas, or I'm making this cake or whatever. But I eventually learned to love the cooking. And so my mom taught me how to bake. And so I started making the cakes and the baking for the reunions and the cookouts and stuff. And so I didn't want to miss this story because I actually have a dessert business now. And the only reason why I have this dessert business is because my mom taught me how to bake. I give her credit for that. She kind of had the foresight to say I could ground him and sit him in his room, or I could teach him how to do something that I love doing as a life skill. And so that's what we're going to do. My first big customer was Milwaukee Bucks. I was making cookies for the Bucks and having cookies in the stadium and in their luxury suites and stuff. And my mom was really proud when I told her about it.
And you were doing this while you were working in academia?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It was busy, but you kind of find the time for stuff you love to do.
Rose and Butch were determined that their children would have as many experiences as possible, which is why they looked at membership in a group called Jack and Jill. If you're unfamiliar, Jack and Jill of America's official website describes its organization as follows. Quote, since 1938, Jack and Jill of America Incorporated has been committed to stimulating children's growth and development through educational, cultural, civic, health, recreational, and social opportunities. That dedication remains today as we work toward improving the quality of life for all children, particularly African American children. Currently, their membership is based on invitation. Per the website, quote, prospective members must be sponsored by a current member in good standing of the chapter in which they're seeking membership. In the 1970s, though, Allen said Rose couldn't get the invite that she was hopeful for. So, she decided to start another group for parents and children in Southwest Philadelphia, a chapter of Tots and Teens, a similar national organization that was founded in the 1950s.
We had a group called Tots and Teens. And what it did is that it would get parents together, like moms, mostly, and then the dads are kind of played a support role, but the moms would bring their children and they would have us together kind of, just meet each other and do cultural things, like go to the museum, or, like we would go to Broadway. We get on the train from Philly, go down and see a Broadway show, or go see, it was sort of like leadership development, sort of, but also we were getting exposed to culture. And so Tots and Teens is also a national group, not as popular as Jack and Jill. I'm not even sure they're around anymore, but did similar things. And so from that, they formed their own chapter, and they were basically like, well, we're going to make sure our kids get exposed to these things and do it on our own. And so, she would take that initiative, and she was one of the people that started the group. Also, through her work at the school, she met people that way, and she would do other volunteer efforts, whether it's fundraising and things like that in the community, as well as just things in our neighborhood itself. She would volunteer to do. And so our neighborhood, our block in particular, was very close, where our friends were there, the parents were friends. And so she had kind of helped establish that community there.
Rose's willingness to take on projects was not anything unusual. It was simply what she and Butch did. They showed commitment in all aspects of their lives, including to each other.
The two things that really stand out to me is, one is that they were both really big on service. And so helping other people, mentoring younger people. And that's one thing I found out after both of their deaths, is that people who were at their funeral or people who reached out would say, hey, yeah, your dad mentored me, or your mom, would talk to me when I needed to talk to somebody. They didn't do it for credit or anything like that. They had a heart of service. I think that was one of the things that really stuck with all of us. My brother, sister, and I, we serve, and just because we've seen it done. And then the other thing is how to treat each other. I don't ever remember my parents arguing in front of us. And that's, not like they didn't have issues like, most married couples do, but they never did that in front of us. They joked around a lot. They were affectionate. My dad was a provider and a protector. And so learning those things and how to work through any issues. And, my dad my mom would still give me advice and give my wife advice as well, in our marriage too, in any situation we run up against. So I was fortunate to have a really great model of of a husband and wife who treat each other respectfully and loved each other. And, I think that's something that really stuck with me.
Some of Donna's fondest memories of her parents are tied into their family rituals and their celebrations, those that they shared with others and the ones that were unique to the Goodmans.
I love holidays. I love summertime. I love weekends. I love Fridays. It's all because of my parents. My mom had like a regimented sort of schedule. Sunday through Wednesday, she would cook. And she would cook like maybe smothered pork chops and rice. And we always had cranberry sauce. She could fry chicken, baked chicken. She made all these wonderful meals. And then on Thursday was smorgasbord day. That was the day where she's like, okay, we're going to clean out the refrigerator. You may have a pork chop from Monday and some rice from Tuesday. Like, we're going to clean everything up. Then Friday was either game night or movie night, where being from Philly, it was sort of a big deal to order a cheesesteak or hoagie or pizza. And so I've even found in my adult life that I look forward to Friday. Friday, I'm the happiest teacher in school because I just love Fridays. I'm excited. And everybody's like, what are you excited about? And I'm like, really, honestly, what am I excited about? But it was always a big deal, in my family. Christmas Eve, we would wrap gifts and bake cookies. Christmas Day, my mother would make these biscuits from scratch. And when I was in college, a few of my classmates, when they would come to pick me up and head on back to Virginia, the one guy had a phrase, I want Donna Mama biscuits. She would make a big old tub of biscuits and we would take them back to school, warm them up, put butter and jelly on them.
Alan said that Rose and Butch both looked forward to becoming grandparents. So when he and his brother Devin married, they were excited, and they were ready to take on the role. Rose hadn't had children in the house for a long time.
She was waiting for grandchildren. It's just she loved it. So my brother, when he met his wife, she had a daughter. So they had her. And then their twin boys came. And then we got our first child, our daughter, Taja. And the way adoption works is that they call you and they tell you they have a child. And then they tell you like when you can pick your child up. So for us, we were in Philly. I think it was like the 26th. And they were like, well, when you get back in town, the 28th or 29th, like you can just come to this address and pick her up. There's no transition period. It's just like, hey, your parents. And so we talked my parents into flying back to Wisconsin with us to help us, just because we had no idea what we were doing. So they came back to help us, and they ended up staying 2 weeks and really just like playing with the baby while we had to go do paperwork or go do other stuff, go get diapers. All like they were wonderful in that aspect as far as like, no. And so they loved it. Then they ended up coming back a few more times. And then even when we would come into town for something, we would bring the children over there and they would love playing with them. So yeah, they loved it.
Donna lived close to her parents for a long time, and her children got to spend a lot of time with them. Butch especially loved to see his grandchildren play sports, and he attended as many games as he could. In fact, he was on his way home from a game with Donna's youngest son in the car when he had a medical event that changed the course of all of their lives.
So they went to see my nephews play basketball, and my dad had a stroke on the highway on 95 coming back from New Jersey to Philadelphia. So the whole family got a group text from my 7-year-old, asking for help. We had to get to him. He was on the highway. So I had to pick up my mother, and then we had to pick up my son from the police station. He had called the paramedics and the police from his tablet. It was really a blessing that they said he pulled over and, they weren't hurt or anything, but he never really fully recovered from his stroke. I think it was such a shock because my dad was like Superman. Like he had survived cancer. They were both cancer survivors. He survived COVID. So, for him to be taken down in this way was like, it was hard to wrap your mind around it.
4 years after his stroke, Butch passed away on November 5th, 2021. He was 82 years old. We want to take a moment to read you an excerpt from his obituary. Quote, Goodman was on his way to propose to Rose Maxine White when he received his draft letter. On June 25th, 1963, he was drafted into the United States Army, where he honorably served as a typist and sharpshooter. Additionally, Donald received the Good Conduct Medal. Upon completing his military service, Butch embarked on a new career. He began working at the Chrysler Corporation in Delaware. He commuted from Philadelphia for 30 years, and during this time, he established lifelong friendships with his carpool buddies. Broomall Street held a special place in Butch's heart. This is where he found a place to raise his family. He was a loving husband for over 58 years. As a father, he found creative ways to keep everyone happy. His love extended beyond his home, and he was known to load up his van and take the neighborhood children to the park. It was amazing to witness him running from the basketball court to the playground to ensure the happiness of everyone within his reach. During his retirement, Butch dedicated much of his time to White Rock Baptist Church. He served as a trustee, which allowed him to continue to utilize the many gifts God bestowed upon him. Butch was blessed with 7 grandchildren, who called him Pop Pop. They knew him for his Sunday brunch, where he served bacon, eggs, grits, waffles, and pancakes, made with crispy edges, upon special request. He purchased memberships at the Philadelphia Zoo and several museums to teach them everything that he knew. There's much more. Butch's hobbies, lists of people who loved him, accomplishments, memories. Donna told us that it is difficult to imagine her mother without her father because their lives have been intertwined for nearly 60 years.
It's hard to talk about my mom and not mention my dad and vice versa. So when he passed, it was devastating for everybody, but I can only imagine how my mom must have felt.
Alan and Donna told us stories about both their parents wanting to move or to stay on Broomall Street over the years. The area had changed, the siblings said, but the block itself, it still felt like home.
I would say this: our block was pretty unique as in compared to the surrounding neighborhood. So I mean, having a rough neighborhood in those days when I was younger is different from having a rough neighborhood now, just because of the prevalence of guns. But you had a couple gangs around who would come cause some trouble with us, but nothing like where we would be scared to go outside. Our block, though, in particular, produced probably roughly maybe 10 to 12 college graduates. I mean, out of our age group, I mean, which is pretty extraordinary compared to the overall neighborhood. Our block was tight knit, and the moms were moms in the neighborhood. So they saw you doing something wrong, they would call you on it, and there was like no issue. What changed was that, some of the neighbors changed, as folks either, passed away, or we had a couple folks maybe move out and move somewhere else. But for the most part, it stayed pretty stable. I think, though, that for Philadelphia, the city itself, it started to get a little, dangerous with younger people with guns. It kind of just made it a little more risky, even though at the same time, gentrification was coming to the area. And so, because the house is about 10 minutes from University of Pennsylvania, we were starting to see sort of the gentrification come creep towards our home. If you go 5 or 10 minutes, you know, west or toward downtown, you have $1 million homes. So like you started to see it kind of creep this way, where you started seeing more white neighbors. You start seeing more other folks that we didn't normally see in the area. You started to see them around. And so that was changing. But our block kind of didn't really change that much. People looked out for each other. As soon as I would come to visit, neighbors would come out, say hello, or I'd go knock on doors, say hi to people who we've known all our lives, and just check in on them. I came to visit more frequently as my parents were getting older. I would come. So maybe a couple times a year I would come in, but more when my dad got sick. My brother would see them more frequently, maybe every couple of weeks, or probably more. And then my sister, while she was living there, she would see them fairly often.
One of the biggest changes was next door to the Goodmans, the loss of a longtime neighbor, Jerry, who'd helped both Rose and Butch over the years. He and their across-the-street neighbor, Ted, were two people that the siblings knew that Rose could always count on.
Our neighbor, Jerry, who lived there up until he moved, he would help my mom out. He would, shovel the snow or rake some leaves, help her take the trash out and stuff. Like, he would help her do that. He was a longtime neighbor. He was renting. We thought he owned the house. Miss Betty's son, Ted, would also look out for my mom. He would cut her grass. He would, do some odd jobs and work. Like, he would help her to get the air conditioner in the window, like those kind of things. Even when my dad was around too, he would help some of that too. But we have family in the area, so especially when my dad got sick, my uncle Hamid, he would come by and either take my mom to see my dad when he was in a nursing home, or after he passed, he would come by and just check on my mom, make sure she was okay, see if she needed anything done. We had another cousin on my mom's side, cousin Jean, who was a nurse. Actually, she would stop by as well, just check on my mom. People from the church would call to check on her.
So at the end of the previous year, our next door neighbor moved. And prior to him moving, someone broke into my mom's car. But when our next door neighbor moved, I think it left her vulnerable. And within that year, that's when this all happened. So I think the changes that started happening happened too quickly for us to really address them. So after I graduated from college, My mom very much wanted to move, but my dad, he had paid off the house and he said, well, why don't we just make it comfortable? Why don't we enclose the porch and just make it nice and comfortable for us? And that's what they did. They were just comfortable. But with him leaving and with my next door neighbor being gone, that really left my mom isolated.
Being in the house without him was lonely. And so we tried to fill the void as much as possible, but at the end of the day, it's still lonely, being without, your husband or your wife in the house. After he died, we were kind of concerned. I mean, at the time, she still seemed to be handling things, even though it was stressful for her. So we would try to do things remotely as well as much as we could do. I would jump on the phone with her if she needed to talk to somebody. We would get on the phone together and do it, as well as my siblings. My mom was having to figure that stuff out. And so what we were noticing was that, there were piles of mail and my mom was keeping up with the bills, but it was stressful for her because she wasn't used to doing it. My dad would get on a computer and learn that, and he had no problem. My mom was not tech savvy. So that was not something that she wanted to figure out or could figure out. So she would go out and do that. She would go to the bank, and that was the one thing that I would try to get her not to do, is go to the bank. But she couldn't really adjust to mobile deposits or online banking because, and it's just a generational thing. If she had some money to deposit or whatever, she wanted to make sure that it was in her account. And the only way she could do that is if she went to the bank. And I was always concerned about that because I didn't want her to be a target, but she did it anyway. But for the most part, she was in the house. She didn't go out too much. She was mostly in the house, and she had a routine of, she would wake up late. She would go to bed late, and she would wake up late. And she would watch her Judge Judy and her shows that she would watch during the day, and, talk on the phone to some of her friends. And that was just kind of the cycle of what she was doing. She would go to sleep and wake up, and like, she would never say like, I'm sad, but you could tell, like, my dad, he had a big personality. He brought life to the house, and so he was missed by all of us, but especially my mom.
All of the siblings, Devin, Alan, and Donna, had spoken to Rose shortly before the break-in. They checked in all the time, they said, to make sure that she had everything she needed and to be certain that she was staying safe. Between their calls and regular visits from family, church members, and neighbors, Rose had a village who would take care of everything that she needed. But, Alan told us, there were certain things that she was set on doing, no matter how much it worried her children.
I spoke to her about a day and a half before the break-in. So we were talking, just about how she was doing, et cetera. And then she mentioned that she went to the bank, and she mentioned that she was going out, to the grocery store. And so my uncle was telling me, hey, tell your mom to be careful out here. And so I was basically reinforcing that by saying, hey, mom, you're safer in your house, that kind of thing. It didn't change her routine at all, but I think she did feel safe in the house. We heard about the rising crime rate in Philly. So we kind of broached that conversation with my mom, but she was dead set against it. And again, she wasn't tech savvy. And so we talked to her about, hey, mom, let's get some cameras on the house. Let's get an alarm on the house. I already know, in hindsight, we talked about that, and like, would that have done anything? Like, I doubt that she would have adapted well to it at all.
I think the tragedy in all this is that she was comfortable in her home. That was her safe space. So when I was leaving to go back home, I said to her, I'm leaving on Saturday because I need to sort of drive around and see what, the schools look like in this area. I said, but if you need me, if you want me to come back Sunday, I'll come back for you. If you're not comfortable being alone in this house. But she was fine. That was her home. She knew where everything was. It was her comfort zone. She was a huge, huge TV fanatic. So she had her schedule and everything lined up around The Young and the Restless. So, she didn't want to leave her area. And I think that's probably what bothers me the most is that, seniors that have paid off their homes and just want to have their time. They've earned this. And for that to be taken away, I think that's the tragedy in it for me.
That was the tragedy, because Rose's children had been guarding against violence outside her home, not within it, and she had no way to reach out for the help that she needed before it was too late. Next time on The Fall Line, we continue Rose's story. If you have any information in the unsolved homicide of Rose Goodman, please reach out to Philadelphia Police Department at 215-686-TIPS. There's a $30,000 reward available in her case. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. Our therapy fund is paid for through Patreon and Apple Premium subscriptions. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to check your subscription to make sure you're set for automatic downloads so you don't miss an episode. My book, Lay Them to Rest, is out everywhere. Find out more through the link in our show notes. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Lauren Orton. The additional research assistance by Melissa Gold. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove, engineered and scored by Southern Gothic Media and Maura Curry. Content advisement by Vic Kennedy and Brandy C. Williams. Special thanks to Liz Lipka.